Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Howard Fuller is Distinguished Professor of Education and founder and director of the Transformation of Learning at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He has had a long and distinguished career, including Superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools and Senior Fellow with the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University. He is Chair of the Board of the Black Alliance for Educational Options, serves on the board of Milwaukee Charter School Advocates, and is an advisory board member of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools and the National Association for Charter School Authorizers. Many of you, I'm sure, know that Dr. Fuller came to Durham in 1965, hired by the fledgling organization Operation Breakthrough, which was set up to break the cycle of poverty through education and job training, and he was hired on as a community organizer. A separate organization known as the Foundation for Community Development was founded in 1967, and Dr. Fuller was made director in charge of setting up neighborhood councils. He trained participants in these councils to organize, develop leaders, and present their grievances to decision-making bodies in order to effect change. He's remembered today for his leadership, organizational and speaking skills, and effectiveness in empowering Durhamites to change their lives for the better. He's with us today to speak about his new book, No Struggle, No Progress, that's about his life and work. So let's welcome Dr. Fuller to the podium.
So it feels too far away. So first of all, I'd like to welcome you all, and particularly the people who are on the bus tour, but also the people from Durham who are here, and I really appreciate you all being here. Basically, what I want to try to do this evening is to talk about the book, but also I'm very willing to answer questions that people have about the work today or the work that we were doing that really was very important to ultimately doing this book. And so this place that we're in right here is a very important place because as the people from Durham know, this was St. Joseph's Church. And a lot of the demonstrations that we were involved in started at this church. It would usually start at this church with a rally or end at this church, depending upon what was going on. And so every time I come here, and this is maybe about the third or fourth time in the last few years that I've been able to come back here, it always holds like a special place, in my heart. And the same applies for Durham and for North Carolina generally. I did actually go downtown yesterday and look at the mural, and it's a pretty powerful mural. I'm anxious to see it when they finish it. Obviously, I know some of the people whose faces are on the mural. I did talk to the person who was working on the mural yesterday, and I want to give her a better picture of Ben Ruffin because I think the one that looks the least like the person is Ben's. And so hopefully, I can give her a younger picture or something, and they can work on it. Mr. Wheeler's picture looks pretty much like him, a younger version of him. And then the picture of Ann Atwater with C.T. Ellis, you can see that one because it was taken from their book, The Best of Enemies. But I think the idea of the mural is really powerful, and I think the most important thing about it is it tries to do more than just put pictures of the leaders up there, but it tries to capture really just, people who were engaged, but who may not have been, viewed as, quote, leaders. And I think that that's really the most important thing and probably the most powerful thing about the mural. So as I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing it when it's finished. So this book, it's entitled No Struggle, No Progress, which I really obviously took from Frederick Douglass. And when I was here last year, I think it was, or I can't remember, a year before, I think it was last year, and to deal with the 50th anniversary of the North Carolina Fund and to talk about the book To Right These Wrongs. I talked about the fact that we actually gathered a whole group of people who were nice enough to come down to the Marriott and talk with me and Lisa Frazier Page. Lisa Frazier Page is the person who collaborated with me to do the book. And she really wanted to be here today, but for a number of reasons, she's not able to be here. And she wanted to make sure that I expressed her regret that she could not be here. But so in any event, people have been pushing me for some time to write a book, and so, I finally did. It took us a couple years to finish the book. And essentially, it is a memoir, but I guess the best way for me to talk about it is to sort of explain why I wrote the book in the first place. And I think there's really like 4 basic reasons why I wrote the book. The first one is that there are about 14 books out there where people talk about me in one way or another, depending upon what their particular view is about me. And the interesting thing about it is when people write books about you, they pick whatever part of you they want to focus on, either positively or negatively, and then they build their narrative about you around that. And then they go find stuff that will support their particular view of you. So given that, I thought it would be interesting, since all these people were talking about me, for me to talk about myself, and to do it, sort of from my perspective. Because what I found was always interesting is when I read books where people talk about me and they start talking about what I was thinking, I'm like, how do you know what I was thinking? How did you figure that out? You didn't ask me if that's what I was thinking. And I probably didn't even know what I was thinking. So that was the first reason, right? The second reason is that I'm hoping that young people read the book. And if young people read the book, the thing that I want them to get out of it, if they don't get anything else out of it, is if you decide to engage in struggle for any extended period of time, the question is, can you deal with all of the contradictions that you're going to face? Because there is no way that you can engage in struggle in this country or anywhere and not face contradictions. And so I started the book with a meeting that I had with George Bush. And I figured some people would not read past that page. They would pick that up and they would say, oh, okay, never mind. But the reason why I say that is because for some people, a meeting with George Bush is an issue of principle. For me, it's an issue of strategy and tactics. And so how you approach this all depends upon your answer to that issue or that problem. And so I had this meeting with George, and I tell people, because I'm brutally honest, and people can think whatever they want to think. I actually liked him. I mean, I'm not talking about his policies. I'm talking about him as a person. That if you really just sat down and talked to him and you didn't know him, I mean, he's really a really interesting dude to talk to. And so then when he invited me to the White House, and I got in the Oval Office, the first thing I was noticing was the Oval Office is smaller than it looks on television. And so then I was looking at all of these doors, and my first thought was, well, which one of these doors did Clinton use? So I knew I was supposed to be serious and everything, but and then Rap Brown wrote a book called Die Nigga Die. And in this book, he was talking about how, when they went to meet with the president for like the March on Washington, how mad he was because all of these big civil rights leaders were just, shuffling and so glad to be with the president. And so he was so angry that he stole an ashtray on the way out. Now, I did not steal an ashtray, but I thought about it. So anyway, so the meeting with Bush for me, I'm trying to get young people, like I said, to understand a concept that Derek Bell taught me. And the concept is interest convergence theory. And what that's about is, and he talked about it in his book, Silent Covenants. But what that's about is that if you go back and look at the civil rights movement that people talk about all the time, he explained to me, he talked about it in his book, but I actually knew him and got to know him very well. And so Derek Bell was saying that what happened was that during the civil rights movement, the reason why black people were able to make progress was because of their own struggle, but also because at that time, the United States was trying to convince the rest of the world that democracy was a better form of government than communism. It was difficult to do that when Bull Connor was sicking dogs on people. So at a certain point in time, the white rulers said to Bull Connor, hey, man, you got to quit sicking dogs on people because there's a larger thing that we're trying to do here that you're messing up. That's not to say that there weren't some people who just thought that was the wrong thing to do, but there were other people who really didn't care about that so much as they did how difficult he was making it to make the larger point that they were trying to make. So what he's saying and what I believe deeply in is that, to get things done sometimes, you sit down with people whose interests you do not share and you do not have the same worldview. But when you sit down with them, you don't see that as a permanent relationship because you have a very different reason for why you're even sitting there in the first place. The question is, are you able to do that? And for some people, they're not. And I get it. I mean, I'm just saying I'm able to do it, but I don't get mad when other people can't do it. And so some friends of mine called me a few weeks ago because we launched the book on September 9th. And the Washington Post did an article on me, and the headline said, warrior or tool of billionaires. And a lot of my friends got mad, and I was telling them, why y'all mad? I mean, first of all, I don't care what they say about me. And second, yes, I sit down with millionaires. I'm trying to sit down with more of them because I'm trying to get money to help people who don't got no money. And it's very hard to get money out of people who don't have money. And most of the people I'm trying to work with, they need money. So my point is, how do I use these resources to do something that I think is important for the community that I'm trying to represent? But when you do that, I get it that some people will call you an Uncle Tom. I've been called everything. I've been called like Uncle Tom. I've been called a radical. I've been called a lackey. I've been called a revolutionary. I've been called a counter-revolutionary. And so my thing is, how does one person get to be all of that? How can you be all of those things? And yeah, that too. But I understand it, right? I mean, I understand it because I've called people names for the very same reasons that people call me names. So what I'm trying to show in this book is that if you're out here, as I said, for any period of time, you're going to face these contradictions in your life, depending upon how you choose to engage in struggle. And how you deal with it is really, really, really critical. And I've said, particularly as it applies to black people, black people will say things like, hey, man, we need more black leaders. We need more black people in these positions. And then as soon as people get in the position, they say he's sold out. You can't, you can't have it both ways. You either want people to be in leadership positions or you don't want them to be in leadership positions. And so when Obama became the president, there's black people mad at him. Oh, man, I still got to pay my mortgage. I still have to pay my bills. Well, yeah, you do. I mean, and he's actually the president of all of the people, not just of black people. I'm not saying he couldn't have done more, but I'm not in that seat. But the point I'm trying to make is, once you get to a position like that, the decision that you got to make is, am I going to try to be effective in this job or not? And what does it take to be effective in this job? And then what does that mean for certain people who think I should be doing things in a certain way, but in order for me to, quote, be effective, however you define that, I have to do it differently. So, but again, I want to say, I think that ought to be open to criticism. And I've always been open to criticism because it doesn't move me. But I also try to listen to the criticism because I think sometimes people are criticizing you and they have very valid reasons for criticizing you. Even though they may not have all of the information that you have, they may still have very valid reasons. So, my hope is that comes out in the book. The third reason I wrote the book, which is actually the most painful part of the book, and the people who are here who know me from when I was here will understand this. The reason why it was painful is because I feel like by telling my story, I get to tell a story of a lot of people who are no longer with us. And so, for Ben and Charcy and John and Arch and Reggie and TJ and Joyce and Francis and Mary Walker and Minnie Fuller and, Lonnie. All of these people who were a part of the work that we did here, I feel like by telling my story, I get to tell their story. And one of the people I talk about in the book is Thelma Miller and TJ. We call her TJ, Thelma Jean Miller. And TJ was in some way the fiercest of all of us, right? And so I was with TJ literally on her deathbed. And I had the opportunity to read to her the part of the book that's about her. And the people who know TJ know that if she had not liked it, she would have cussed me out, deathbed or not. And the fact that she liked what I had to say was very, very important to me. So what I hope I did in this book, and I know like Peggy, Vivian, all you can appreciate this, but I hope what I did in this book was to honor all of the folks who are no longer with us, but who were totally engaged in the work that we were doing. But honestly, that was the most painful part of the book. Probably the second most painful part of the book was they pushed me to talk about personal stuff that I didn't want to talk about. And this is not like a tell-all book or nothing, I ain't trying to do that. But there was a part of the book, and I hope my son, feels like this as I do. But I didn't meet my father until I was 30-some years old. And this dude rolled up to me, and I had just given a speech in California and said, "I'm your father." And I was like, I really didn't feel anything. I know some people, they would have hugged them and all that, but I wasn't trying to hug this dude. And I literally know nothing about him. And I was in the same situation, but my son reached out to me in a very, very different way to keep me from repeating the same thing that happened between me and my father. And so that wasn't like what I wanted to talk about in that book necessarily. But if you decide to do a memoir and you're going to be honest, then you have to own some stuff, right? And you can't just talk about all the stuff that put you in the best light. I think you have to talk about mistakes. And I think you have to talk about them in a real way. And, so those things are a little painful in the book. But the last reason that I wrote this book was it gave me a way to honor my mother and my grandmother. Because these were the two most important people, like in my life. And you have to understand, like the blood that is like in my vein. And the best way I can tell it is my grandmother, this is in the 1940s for all you younger people. This is not old school. This is ancient school. So, like in Louisiana in the it was the late 1940s. And we were sitting my mother, Juanita Smith, and I were sitting on the steps, at our house. And the cops came and said that some dude had robbed people and that he was in our house. And my mother said, there's nobody in our house. And the cop kicked her. And some people called my grandmother, Pearl Wagner. My grandmother, this is in the 40s in Louisiana. My grandmother came home, got her gun, and went to the police station. This is so, so just so you understand what kind of blood is like in my veins, right? And in Louisiana back then, they had the houses were built like up off of the ground. And so you could run up underneath the house and play. And so I'm getting ready to talk about something now that would be considered child abuse today. So we're not talking about today, we're talking about then. And so my grandmother saw me, and we used to run when the police came. We would run up underneath the house, right? And so my grandmother saw me run up underneath the house when these cops came by. So my grandmother was the kind of person who, she would make you go get the switch. But it couldn't be a switch that would break. It had to be like one of those green ones, that when you do like this, it would make a noise. So she gave me this whipping, and her whole thing was, I better not never see you do this again, to run from the police or any white person when you've not done anything. So I had to talk about that because that lesson and my grandmother's, she was the baddest person that I knew. My mother, on the other hand, made they both did, but made great sacrifices for me. My mother, was beaten, by my stepfather, who I hated. And I confronted him when I was 16. And I never really had a discussion with my mother about why. That was because I was grown before I knew there was a word called why. My little grandson asked me the other day, why? I didn't know you could ask grown people why when I was growing up. But my mother, there was no word called why. When you were told to do something, you did it. There wasn't no why or I ain't going to do that, which is worse than why. I'm not sure which one of those two words were the worst. But I just know about all the sacrifices that my mother made and my grandmother made so that I could, be where I am today. And one of the things that worries me about the world in which we live in today, it's not clear to me that the youngest generation is going to be better off than we are. In fact, I can see a way where they're going to be worse off based on what it is that's happening in the world in which we live. So those are really the reasons why I wrote the book. There's also things in the book that clearly will be a surprise to a lot of people. um, and in part, and there are people here who know this, but in part, I have two names. And so there's some people in this country who never heard of Owusu Sadoke. And then there's some people in this country who never heard of Howard Fuller, except he's the same person. And my FBI files, when I tried to do the Freedom of Information stuff, I had to go on both names to try to see what they were talking about. But so there's a period of my life, particularly the period after the founding of Malcolm X Liberation University, and then the organizing of African Liberation Day in 1972. And then, as I was explaining to some of the people who were on the caravan, the 30 days that I spent with a guerrilla column in Mozambique, which I really detail a lot because I kept a diary for every day that I was in there. And so there's a chapter that's really just on, being in Mozambique. So I try to detail, like all of those kinds of stories. And the thing about the book, at least from my perspective, is I don't see the struggles that we had in Durham and the struggles that I'm engaged in today on education reform. I see them as extensions of the same struggle. Other people have to draw their own conclusions, but I'm clear. And the thing about me is I don't have any problem sleeping at night because I'm not clear about who I am. I might have trouble sleeping because of some strategy or tactic or something, or did I do this right or that right? But I'm very clear about why I do what I do. I'm also very clear about who I am as a person. And so I'm not bothered by what other people think about me or how they perceive me to be. Because I've learned over all of these years is that the one person that has to be clear is you. And if when you turn out the light at night, if you clear, you can sleep. It's when you don't have a core and you yourself don't know who you yourself is, that's when I think you got a problem. And I don't have that problem. So that's pretty much the book. And obviously, my hope is that people will read it. This is I think my 21st city in 29 days. So that's a good thing because you wouldn't want to write a book and nobody wants to read it. But it's also a little difficult. And so tomorrow I know I'll be at the Regulator bookstore, but I'm going to go up to Gaston to visit the KIPP school. And then I think on, what day is today? Sunday, Monday. Tuesday, I think I'm going to be at the International Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro. And then I'm going to do a thing at Quail Roost, the bookstore in Raleigh. And then come back and do another thing at Duke. But yesterday I was at Duke with the young scholars. And these are students 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And that was really a joy to do. And if you really want to feel ancient, sit down with some 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But they have interesting questions. I was explaining one of the times when I was arrested up in Belmont. And, when the students had taken over the building, and Peggy, I talked about when students took over the building, at Duke. And so the little kid asked me, what did y'all talk about? Yeah. So his whole thing was, when y'all were taking over this building and y'all were sitting around, what did y'all talk about while y'all were taking over these buildings? So, nobody ever asked you. Everybody wanted to know the big, why did y'all go into the building? Did the police get you? And this little kid's thing was, if y'all was sitting around in there all day, what did y'all talk about? Which was really, an interesting conversation. So So anyway, that's the book. Lynn wanted me to talk for 45 minutes. I could never talk for 45 minutes. I'd go crazy. So, what I really want to do is to kind of give you all an opportunity to ask me questions, either about the book or about some of the work that we did here in North Carolina. And so we're going to open up the floor.
What I'm going to ask you to do is come to the microphone, if you don't mind, to ask your question, because we are taping this. We want to have this for posterity, and that way you'll be seen and your question will get recorded. Yes, there's one there and one here. So you've got two options, one over there and here.
Hi, thanks for coming back to Durham. I'd be interested in hearing more about your experience with Malcolm X University, and especially with the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
I'm a member of St. Philip's Episcopal Church, which is not far from where Malcolm X University was. I wasn't a member then, so I'm curious in general about the university and also your interaction with Episcopalians in this diocese, in this town.
Yeah, okay. All right, so Malcolm X Liberation University. So when I was when I was put in charge of community development for the North Carolina Fund, one of the ideas that I had, it really wasn't my idea. They already had a program called a Community Action Technician program, and I remember Charsley was in that. But when I went over there, okay, first let me explain the North Carolina Fund, because I'm talking about stuff like y'all know about all this stuff. Okay, Terry Sanford was the governor in North Carolina in the 60s. And Terry Sanford was viewed, particularly at that point in time, as a, quote, liberal governor. And he was. I mean, depending upon how you characterize political thought at that time. And so Terry Sanford came up with this idea of creating an organization called the North Carolina Fund. And the North Carolina Fund, the objective was going to be to try to fight poverty in North Carolina. And the North Carolina Fund preceded Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program. And so when Lyndon Johnson came up with the Great Society program, and the bill that was passed was the Economic Opportunity Act, which created the War on Poverty. They actually modeled the legislation after some of the ways that the North Carolina Fund was structured. So when I came to Durham in 1965, I came to work for Operation Breakthrough, which was a community action program created by the War on Poverty. And I was in charge of it was called Area A. They divided the city up into 3 areas, and they were really creative, A, B, and C. And so A was essentially the black community that included Hayti, but also MacDougall Terrace and other areas of the city. B was over by where Few Gardens was, and that's really where poor whites were. And C was out in the county, Bragtown, and out in there. So when I first came down here, I was in charge of Target Area A. And then after I was here for a while, they put me in charge of all of the target areas. Then I left Operation Breakthrough because people wanted me to come back to Chicago to do community organizing. But when people found out they wanted me to come back to Chicago, the North Carolina Fund offered me a job to come over there and to do in 11 counties what I was doing in Durham. So that's how I got over to the North Carolina Fund, right? And so one of the things we did was to hire college students to become organizers. And I know Peggy was one of them, but and then we placed these students in different cities, like in Raleigh, Greensboro, Wilson, Rocky Mount. We were up in Bertie County, Fayetteville. So we had people all around the state, right? college students. So, and I hope I can get this right because this is what I said in the book. Peggy may jump up and say, that ain't true. But anyway, so what happened is that the students from Duke who came back after that summer began to push for an Afro-American studies program. And, began to try to get the administration at Duke to do the African-American studies program. And the administration was not moving on that. And so the students decided, led by a brother named Chuck Hopkins, who ultimately got married to Peggy, but they took over the Allen building. And I was at Bennett giving a speech because I was on my way to give a speech at Spelman. And so I got word that the students had taken over the Allen building, and they had renamed it Malcolm X building, is what they call it. So I rushed back to Durham, got in through a back window, back door or something, and this was earlier in the day. And there was a lot of discussion in that building that day. But as it started getting later in the day, a lot of the students were getting a little less militant. And I remember some people talking about, my mama didn't send me here to get arrested and, send me to Duke. So even though people, wanted to, so what we tried to do was to figure out a way, and we did, figured out a way for them to leave the building, but to leave it in a militant way. So we actually left the building like this. Except the problem was the Durham cops didn't know that we had left. And so they actually broke out windows and tear gassed the Allen building. And when they got in there and found out we weren't in there, they then tear gassed all these white students who were just standing around watching. And there's actually photographs of this. And it turned these white students into militants because they were being tear gassed for no reason at all. So we ended up with a march on the president's house. But what had happened was the administration had given the black students a room up at the top of what was then the student union. And they called it the black room, I think is what it was called. So we were sitting around in that room and came up with the idea of creating an independent college. And we decided to name it Malcolm X Liberation University. And so, and at first it was just going to be like, and I actually have a picture in the book, because what we did was the students from Duke were supposed to leave Duke and come to Malcolm X Liberation University. There's a picture in the book with the chapel, with the Duke chapel in the background, of the black students marching with all of their white students who supported them from Duke, headed to 5 Points. We started here at St. Joseph's Church, and we marched down to 5 Points. And symbolically, what was supposed to happen was we were supposed to greet them and bring them into the black community. And then once that happened at 5 Points, we actually came back here, and there are some photographs, I think, and there was a huge rally in this church. And, and we were talking about how these students are now coming back to the black community. Okay, in truth, none of them actually left Duke. The closest one was Bertie, who she didn't actually leave Duke, she just quit going to class. So what we did was we formed Malcolm X, and although it's supposed to start out as a full-time college, it started out as part-time. And we were having classes on Saturday. And I was working for Foundation for Community Development at the time. And Sergeant Schreiber, who was in charge of the Office of Economic Opportunity, was holding up a grant that was going to create an organization that still exists in Durham called United Durham Incorporated, which was this economic development project. He was holding that up until they did something about me. Because by then, I was a problem, to say the least. So rather than to stop that grant, I quit. and became the full-time person to organize Malcolm X Liberation University. We had no money. The Episcopal Church had back then, in response to all the Black Power stuff, churches and different organizations created black entities within the context of their existing structures. The Episcopal Church created an entity called the General Convention for Special Programs, GCSP, of the Episcopal Church. It was led by a man named Leon Modesti. Herb Callender was the staff member, and Viola Plummer was the staff member. We put in a proposal to create Malcolm X Liberation University to the General Convention of Special Programs for the Episcopal Church. The staff supported it, and it got approved. The people in North Carolina had no knowledge that this was occurring. And so when this announcement came out that their church had given a grant to create Malcolm X Liberation University in Durham, North Carolina, the Episcopalians in North Carolina went berserk. I mean, they were like, what? So I ended up having to go up to New York to meet with the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church to explain that we were not going to be developing guerrilla fighters and all of that. But I think the guy down here, his name was O'Neill, I can't remember. They were not pleased. And there really almost was an effort for some people wanted to pull out of the church. And ultimately, it was an issue at the what do they call it, the Congress or... Yeah, when they brought everybody together. I think it was, I forgot where it was. But somehow it all worked out. Some few people may have left the church, I don't know. But it was a little tense in North Carolina at that time. But that's how it happened. Okay. Is that enough of an explanation? Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Fuller. My name is Pablo Blanco from the community in Honduras. We're currently experiencing a silent genocide back home. You had indicated that the current generation now may be will be worse off in the future. I just want to know, what indicators do you see now that will prompt you to say that?
Okay. Let's see how to explain this. Okay. Thomas Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat, which was the scariest book I read until I read That Used to Be Us. But if you read The World is Flat, what's absolutely clear is the world that existed 15 years ago, 20 years ago, no longer exists today. That the type of technology that exists, for example, has created horizontal economic movement as opposed to vertical. And so there's all kinds of different ways that people do things today. But because of the nature of the technology and the nature of the knowledge base that you have to make the greatest use of it, what I see is a widening gap. There's fewer and fewer people who have control over more and more of the wealth. And so what's happening is the notion of, like, quote, a middle class, I think that notion is shrinking significantly, not just in this country, but it's happening in other places in the world. And because I don't think that resources are infinite, what's happening is as fewer and fewer people gain control over more and more of the dwindling resources, or not dwindling, or the resource base, it means that more and more people are going to have less and less opportunity to become a part of the economic mainstream. And the requirements for you to become a part of the economic mainstream are getting, how can I put it, are increasing at the same time that significant numbers of people are not getting an education that would allow them to participate in what it is that is occurring. And so if I just look at this, just look at my own community, that's one of the great worries. Because, like, I chair the board of a charter school, and 9 through 12. And we had 6 kids who came into our school this year in 9th grade who cannot read at all. Not that they can read a little, they can't read at all. And the average grade level now is about 6th grade. And you should come in with an ACT score of maybe about 15. Our kids come in at 11.6, 12. So what I'm trying to paint for you is a picture that says that for a growing number of people, the tools that you would need to, quote, participate in the economic order, it's the pathway there. I just don't see the pathway there. And so, for example, if you read what's her name's book about the new Jim Crow, and she talks about, for example, the impact of like the number of young black men that have prison records and all of that. I mean, when you start looking at all of that, I'm just very worried, man, about the future of large numbers of people. I'm not even talking about what's going on in Honduras. I'm just talking about when I look at what's going on in the United States. But when you look at the so-called immigration problem in this country, it's clear that people are trying to get here to get away from persecution and oppression. And it doesn't seem to me that that is lessening. It seems to me that's increasing. So when you see all of those things, you just wonder, at least I wonder, what is the future going to be like for large numbers of young people today? And then I'll end, and you can push me if I haven't asked you a question. When I was younger, man, like, I really thought I could change the world. I really did. Today, I feel like I'm on a rescue mission. I'm just trying to rescue as many people as I can. And I'm under no illusions that the work that I'm doing is leading to fundamental structural reform of anything. but I'm hoping that young people will still want to change the world. And so the way I look at it is every kid that I can rescue, that kid may be the one that changes the world. But it's hard for me to see that the work that I do today is having a larger structural impact on poverty. It is at best an individual thing, where if I can change the individual trajectory of some of these kids' lives, maybe I can break the individual chain that is generational. But I don't see that as like changing the whole thing. Does that make sense? Because if it doesn't, I mean, I'll try to. Yeah. So that's what I mean by that.
Dr. Fuller, if I could, I had a couple of questions. I just purchased your book, and I just had a chance to look at a couple of pages. You mentioned briefly Lewis Austin, the editor of Carolina Times. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with him, and you mentioned briefly that he gave you some advice, and maybe the advice that he gave you. And also, you talked about Malcolm X Liberation University. I wonder if you could talk about the role of students from North Carolina Central and or faculty in that. Thanks.
Okay, so first of all, Mr. Austin was the head of the black newspaper. Was it Carolina Times? Yeah. And so his office and where he published the newspaper was on Pettigrew Street. And when we opened up the center in Target Area A, we were above Skippy Scarborough's, or the Scarborough wasn't Skippy's, but it was his father, but the Scarborough Funeral Home, which was on Pettigrew Street. And the pool hall was also on Pettigrew Street, which that ain't got nothing to do with it. But except I used to shoot a lot of pool in there with Wise Owl. But anyway, so Mr. Austin was like, he was like a bulldog at the ankles of what he saw as the black bourgeoisie. He wasn't just after white people. He was also, because all of you all know that these issues people face are both race and class. And Mr. Austin was, as you all remember, he was at everybody who really wasn't like fighting as he could see it to make things different. And so I used to go talk to him, right? Because, I mean, I was young, I was crazy, but he was crazier than me. And he knew a whole lot more than I did. And so he would give me advice, particularly when I would get certain types of criticism from certain people. I would go to him and he would say, Howard, don't listen to these people. You got to keep doing what you're doing. Don't let these people get you down. So that relationship was very important to me. But it's not a relationship that most people knew anything about. It's just like most people knew nothing about the relationship that I had with John Wheeler. You know, you would have thought that there would have been no relationship that I would have with John Wheeler, but that wasn't true. And a lot of white people didn't understand how John Wheeler felt about white people. And a lot of black people didn't either. I mean, because he was the power broker for the black community. But I used to have a lot of conversations with people like him and Shag Stewart. And one of my favorite people in the whole world was Floyd McKissick. And people never knew about all these relationships that I had with you know, sort of old line or traditional black leadership. But I did have those relationships. And I came to understand sort of how different people played different roles. And that's really helped me today, because when I look at change today, this is how I look at it. I look at it like there's a small circle of people who will storm the Bastille. There's a circle of people around them who will hold the coats of the people who are going to storm the Bastille. They're not going to storm the Bastille, but they'll hold the coats. Then there's a group of people around them who will cheer for the people who hold the coats. They're not holding the coats, they're not storming the Bastille, but they'll cheer for the coat holders. And a part of a job of an organizer is to figure out who's going to do what, and how do you use all of those different possibilities and not demand that everybody do everything, because they're not going to do it. So the issue is to figure out how to take advantage of what it is that people will bring to the table. And that's what I tried to do, you know, like as an organizer. And my relationship with people like Mr. Austin was like that, you know. And I love Mr. Austin. There are two people, man, that people don't talk about enough ever. Mr. Austin and Oliver Harvey. Mr. Harvey was about this tall. This man took on Duke University in the 40s, man. Mr. Harvey talked about the need to have a union at Duke in the 1940s for maids and janitors at Duke University, man. I mean, people don't understand how much courage, you know, that took. And I learned so much from Mr. and Mrs. Harvey about courage, man. I don't know. So that's the answer to that. On the thing about NCC, there were some professors at NCC that were supportive, and the students were always like a critical part of the marches, and in fact, when we did some of the stuff at McDougal Terrace, and I just saw that Louise and Nathaniel came in, but it wasn't always just the residents of McDougal Terrace who were in those demonstrations. There was also students from NCC, which gave us more people. Okay, and so let me tell you a story that does deal with NCC. Could I see the book a minute? And then for those of you who bought the book or picked it up, whatever, I'll sign it for you. So this photograph right here is my favorite photograph in the whole world. And this was taken the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the reason why I'm telling you this, because this is going to get to NCC. So I have a group of younger people with me. They're younger than me. Everybody's younger than me. But they're called the Fuller Torch Fellows, and they can explain to you what that means. But anyway, so yesterday we were able to go down to Main Street, and I actually figured out pretty much where I was standing when this picture was taken. Because when this picture was taken by Billy Barnes, I had just spotted 3 white men up on the bank building. It was CCB, bank building, with rifles. And so now this is connected to NCC. So when Martin Luther King was killed, the day that Martin Luther King was killed, Adam Clayton Powell had been invited to Durham to give a speech over at Duke. But Adam Clayton Powell was an alcoholic, and so he was too drunk to come over to give the speech. And so, but I was staying on Lawson Street, right across from NCC. Adam Clayton Powell was staying like about 4 or 5 houses down from where I was, going towards Austin Avenue. So we were over at Duke waiting for him to come. His aide gets up to say, basically, he couldn't come and was getting ready to give a speech. And that's when we found out that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. See, because we didn't have Twitter and Instagram, and so news didn't travel that fast. So I rushed back over to Lawson Street, where I was staying, and Adam Clayton Powell was making the argument that this was a conspiracy to kill all black leaders. So we actually stayed up all night with guns to guard Adam Clayton Powell. But I heard that the students from NCC had gathered over at the auditorium, and they was getting ready to come downtown. And I knew that if that happened, people were going to get killed that night. Because the police were down there, the Klan was down there. And so I went over there, because people called me and said, Howard, you got to come over here. So I went over there, and I was able to talk them down from going downtown that night. Because I knew that that was going to be horrible. And so what I convinced people to do was the next day, let's have a disciplined, peaceful march in the memory of Dr. King. And so that march is what you're seeing. So what that photograph is showing is that the students, mostly from NCC, and some students from Duke too came, but we marched from NCC down Fayetteville Street, over to Pettigrew, probably up Roxborough to Maine. And we had a rally at City Hall, and the mayor had to come out and begrudgingly thank me for for no violence taking place at Durham. I know he probably choked, but anyway. So after the rally, we were on the way back on Main Street. What you can't see is the Klan was over on the other side of the street. And for people who were in that march, I remember. So anyway, so the students were very active. I wouldn't say, you had people like Early Thorpe, the historian, and people like that from NCC who were involved, but most of them were not, actively involved. Right. Yeah, you know where it was taken, Vivian? Is right where the pharmacy is now? Right. Correct. Because you can see we looked at it yesterday, and we kind of figured out almost exactly where I was. Because if you look, there's a panoramic of the march in the inside, about 2 or 3 pages in, and you can see the self-help building where self-help is now. But if you keep on going, right there where the pharmacy is, there's a ledge like this, and that's still the same. The picture that's on the mural, the one with me like this, which is on the mural, that actually was further up, and it was almost like over on the other side of the street because self-help put that awning back up. Right. Right. So, but anyway, so that was let me make sure I answer your question. So that was the connection in terms of NCC, and also I tried to respond to whether or not the faculty or was that engaged, and they weren't. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then should I keep going and stop after I make the announcement? Okay. Okay. All right.
Good afternoon. My comment and question is about what you said a while ago about the few at the top having control of the majority of what's out there for everyone. How can the poverty that we see today, and I call it forced poverty because it's being forced on communities, when we know from 50 years ago, were there ever financial platforms put in place for the common people? People got housing like they're doing now. They got paved streets. They got a lessening of what poverty was about. But where was the finances put in place? Because people tell me now in some of the meetings I go to, well, we have resources. I'm a 501(c), and we have resources to help someone with a house, or to help someone with medical needs, or to help someone with food. My question is, why is it people that have needs, and we are always talked about as being needy, are always wanting something? But my thing is, what was taken from our community and still is, and nobody really wants to talk about what's owed. But why was money, just like now, if people are getting help through social service agencies, and they're told, we're making you self-sufficient, this is what our goal is, but you go in at recertification time and you tell them, I've got $100 I've saved that's over that cap they put on you, you're kicked off whatever it is you're getting. To me, financial poverty is what's going to get us to stay at the bottom. And until we can come up with some legal programs where the masses, along with education and some laws that say, if you get money saved up, the bank cannot go into it, or the government cannot go into it and say, we're taking these as non-user fees because you haven't used it for 2 months. But nobody wants to talk about that. And I'm going way back 300 years ago. The children you said that can't read, if they had access to money that should have been passed down and could have been invested, could the parents not have found some way to get them help to read so that they don't end up at 13 and 14 kicked out on the street and you get a record? and can't get a job.
Okay, so with all due respect, I don't think you asked the question. You made a statement, and I'll just let your statement stand. I mean, because that wasn't a question, but I appreciate it.
That's what I don't know.
What is the question?
What would lack of poverty have gotten us by now had poverty not been forced? That was the question.
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is we wouldn't have poverty. Mm-hmm. Okay, but the thing is, this society, or no society that I know of, has been set up in such a way that everyone shares equally in the wealth of that society. Or that I mean, I've studied political science, I've studied Marx, I've studied Lenin, I done listened to people harangue me for years. Every society that I'm aware of, there are haves and have-nots. There is the struggle for the ideal, that would say that every person, that the relationship between the individual and the common good is going to be such that the common good provides what is needed so that the individuals will be able to reach their highest level, and that the individual then has a responsibility to give back to the common good so that that dialectical relationship works. I don't know of any society, and there may be other people here who do, where that has worked. The only thing I know is people that don't have nothing, you ain't going to get nothing unless you fight for it. And even when you fight, you're never going to reach the level that you ought to reach. But what you got to decide is, are you going to fight? And then either you're going to fight or you're not. Because if you go back and look at what we did back then, streets are paved now, not because people woke up one day and said, we ought to pave these streets. We had to fight to get these streets paved. Did nobody just roll up in there and say, hey, we're going to pave these streets? We had to do rent strikes to get people's houses fixed. And so my point is, at whatever point you are in history, if you're going to try to make life better, the people who don't have are going to have to fight. Because with all due respect, people don't give up power. Power has to be taken. And I hear people all the time talk about win-win strategies. Ain't no win-win strategies, man. If somebody got everything and you ain't got nothing, in order for you to get something, somebody going to have to win less. You know what I mean? There's going to have to be, you can't change things without changing them. And what I've found in this country, in this world, is a lot of people want change as long as don't nothing change. And so, I mean, for me, it's like I get up every day clear that for whatever reason, the kids that are in our school, if we don't figure out a way to educate them, A, they're not going to be educated. And two, I tell them all the time that an education in America guarantees you nothing. But I will guarantee you, you will have nothing without it. And so that's the only way I know how to live, you know what I'm saying? And I don't have the answers to the broad, societal changes that have to take place in order for it to be the kind of society that I would like to have it. So what I'm always ended up doing is trying to figure out as best I can how to fight to make it better for as many people as I can possibly make it better for. And then to do that, what kind of policies need to be changed? What kind of laws need to be changed? What can we do for ourselves that don't require government intervention? So to me, it's like a combination of all of those things. And I'll never be satisfied because it's like Mary McLeod Bethune said, that as long as a single the way she put it is the drums of Africa beat in my heart. And as long as a single Negro child is not able to show his or her worth, my soul cannot rest. And that's sort of where I'm at. So let me read this. I'm going to ask you to stay in your seats for a moment for an important announcement and a very special guest. And so here's Durham County's Library Marketing and Development Manager, Gina Rogier. I hope I said that name right.
Is this on? Okay. We're going to take advantage of this gathering of people who know and appreciate Durham history to launch a new initiative to support the North Carolina collection. Durham Library Foundation launched a campaign for the library a year ago this spring, a $1.5 million campaign. And one of the goals of that campaign is to support the North Carolina collection. And today we are announcing a $25,000 challenge to raise those funds for the North Carolina collection between now and June of 2016. The North Carolina collection, or the NC Room's annual budget, is about $150,000 a year. And over the last 4 years, we've had a multi-year grant from GSK for $25,000 each year. That runs out in June of 2016. And so we are asking those people in Durham who know history, who love history, who appreciate history, to support this resource. The North Carolina Room, as we call it now, it may have a more appropriate name at some point in the future, because it is the resource for Durham history. It is the resource for documents, papers, maps, those kinds of things that you all donate to the room. And we want to grow that collection, and we want it to have the margin of excellence that it should have. It is a fantastic resource, and it can only get better with additional support. When you donate to the Durham Library Foundation to support the North Carolina collection, you can do that in one of two ways. You can just make a general donation, or you can make a donation to an endowment that has been set up specifically to support that room. And that endowment was started by a Durham history icon, Judge Willis Wichard, and he's going to come up and tell you a little bit more about that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him as he comes to the stage here. Judge Wichard is a Durham native and a former North Carolina state representative, senator, appellate court judge, and Supreme Court justice. I believe he's the only person to hold that distinction. He has lectured and written extensively on North Carolina politics, law, and history, and his commitment to public service and community betterment has earned him numerous honors and recognitions during his distinguished career. He was recently appointed to the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary, a 15-member group that evaluates the professional qualifications of all nominees to the Supreme Court of the United States, circuit courts of appeals, and district courts. Members of this elite group are chosen based on their reputation for professional competence, integrity, and devotion to public service. That certainly describes Judge Willis Wichard. He currently practices law with Tillman Hinkle and Wichard PLLC, and he is the founding president of the Durham Library Foundation. Judge Wichard.
I just want to say really quickly that Judge Wichard will speak briefly, and then Dr. Fuller will be out in the lobby out here. You can buy books, and he'll be signing books. So please stick with us.
Thank you, Gina and Lynn. I could have just gone on listening to Dr. Fuller, and I'm sure you all could have too. I was a young lawyer in the community when many of the things he has talked about were going on. I remember very well the night and the weekend when Dr. King was killed and all the difficulties we had then. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I was asked by the trustees of the library, I think in the year 2000, to be the founding president of the Durham Library Foundation. I should not have done it. I was dean of a law school at the time, and that's more than a full-time job, but I'm glad I did. It was my idea, this phrase margin of excellence, that a library foundation is not designed to take the place of the public funding that an institution like a library should get. It's designed to give it extra funds to produce the margin of excellence. I'm a product, in no small part, of the Durham County Library. I grew up in Durham. My family was not wealthy, but we frequented the library, and I checked out books, read books in the children's room there, and so forth. So I was a soft touch when I was asked to take this job. Well, as you know, when you do things like this, you're expected to give your time and your energy, but you're also expected to give some money. So in considering where I wanted the funds I would put into the Library Foundation to go, I thought about a lot of areas of the library, but I settled on the North Carolina collection because I worry about our losing our state and local history. And Lynn, as the curator of that collection, has been making that an archival facility for Durham history. The two of us have been to civic clubs, Ruritan clubs, book clubs, anywhere we could get an invitation to talk to people about leaving important papers relating to Durham history, giving them or leaving them at their death to the North Carolina collection. So we need two things to make that collection all that it can and ought to be, to give it the margin of excellence. One is money, and that's what this special campaign that Gina has announced is about. And the other is for you who have valuable papers regarding Durham and North Carolina history, and to encourage your friends to give their papers there. So I'm happy to be a part of this campaign to bring in some extra money for the endowment that supports that collection, and I hope you'll join us in this endeavor. Thank you.